Good afternoon to you. It is 3:06 here, News Talk 105.9 WMAL, where we're making sense of the news. Coming up, 3:30, we talk to an expert on our border. Ken Cuccinelli is here, former Deputy Secretary of Homeland Security under President Trump. We'll get his reaction to the Mexican president's remarks this weekend about whether or not he'll help us at all. It appears he is engaging in some blackmail here. Eddie Scarry will be with us at 4 o'clock from the Federalist. We talked to him about the meltdown happening at MSNBC right now. Hilarious. Eddie Scarry will react. Joe Simonson joins us from the Washington Free Beacon. He's got a brand new report out today on how Joe Biden lied about a man who burned his junk off. Joe Simonson with those details ahead. And Will Scharf is here. He's an attorney for President Trump, which makes him a perfect guest on a day with a lot of legal news for the former and perhaps future president of the United States. You can join us at 888-630-9625, 888-630-WMAL. I want to get into the 60 Minutes episode yesterday. As you probably know, 60 Minutes airs on CBS once a week, Sunday evenings, while they're in season. And yesterday's entire episode I watched from start to finish, and there were so many lies, exaggerations, distortions, and so much nonsense. I feel like I have to get to it all. I'm going to try to over the course of the program, but we've got a packed show for you today. And at the outset, I want to talk a little bit right now about what we're going to talk to Will Scharf about at 5 o'clock, and that is Donald Trump's day in court today. He had some success today in getting that massive judgment against him just absolutely cut down practically to a third of what he's obliged to pay now. Trump's $454 million judgment bond has been slashed by more than half in an appeals court ruling, says Fox. But if you add interest, again, substantially more here. An appeals court slashed former President Trump's bond payment on Monday, saying Trump must pay $175 million within the next 10 days. Trump had previously faced a Monday deadline to pay the $454 million bond payment that came as a result of civil fraud allegations from New York Attorney General Letitia James. A New York appeals court, hours before the deadline to post the $454 million, lowered that bond considerably. The court ordered that Trump post $175 million within 10 days. Trump stepped out around noon today to announce that he was pleased with the decision, that he will be able to take care of it.
Trump, how does the appeals court ruling? Thank you very much. Judge Engeron has done a terrible disservice to the state of New York.
Judge Engeron, who he's talking about, or he said Engeron, I'm not sure how you pronounce it, but either way, he's saying this is the guy who has done a terrible disservice to the people of New York in his capacity as a judge here in the state. And, by slapping Trump with a nearly $500 million fine for a crime with no victims is insane. Trump is right about that. I heard our friend Chris Plant lay out this morning, that Bernie Madoff had a $10 million bond. You know that? $10 million. They hit Trump with a $500 million bond. Got to pay up $500 million. Bernie Madoff, he screws over a lot of people. $10 million. Heck, Sam Bankman-Fried and the FTX scandal. I looked up his bond today. What was his bond? $250 million. It was half of what Judge Engeron was trying to stick Trump with. $250 million. And Trump's case has no victims. So Trump has, and the people who support him, and normal Americans everywhere, including Americans, presumably, who don't support him, have every right to be outraged right now about the way that Trump's been treated, and by extension, you. So Trump starts with the obvious, which is Engeron's a jerk.
Has done a terrible disservice to the state of New York. What he's done is terrible. Businesses are fleeing, and you see that. We just released a statement on Truth. Businesses are fleeing, and crime is flourishing all over the state, and what he's done is such a disservice and should never be allowed to happen again. New York State is being battered by his decision. So I greatly respect the decision of the Appellate Division, and I'll post either $175 million in cash or bonds or security or whatever is necessary very quickly within the 10 days.
He's going to come up with the money. He's got 10 days to do it. He says, I'm going to come up with it very quickly, whatever it takes. If I can get a loan to do it, or if I just have to do it in cash, one way or the other, we're going to resolve this. $175 million. Wouldn't that be nice, by the way? Just like, you have $175 million in cash sitting around? Now, granted, that's a huge chunk of change. He was, I believe, Trump's people have been saying he has somewhere in the vicinity of $500 million in cash on hand, which is, of course, why Engeron was going for all $500 million. We're going to go for all of it. But the guy has a real estate empire to manage. He has expenses, it turns out, in managing all of that. So the goal was to impoverish Trump. On appeal today, Trump had some success in staving that off. And, of course, I guarantee you, it's all over the place, I'm certain. Lefties furious that once again, Trump has wriggled out of the destruction that they had planned for him. He always gets away with it. Damn it. We were going to get him for $500 million. No. $175 million. That's what he has to come up with within 10 days.
And I thank the appellate division for acting quickly. But Judge Engeron is a disgrace to this country, and this should not be allowed to happen. Thank you very much.
Well, of course it shouldn't. Trump, a few minutes later, would make another statement on the subject, and he said, look, this is election interference. This is election interference. Now, by the way, it's obvious to anybody with two eyes and two brain cells to rub together that this is, of course, election interference. All of these ridiculous left-wing cases against Trump all across the country, typically done in jurisdictions where they have favorable jury pools. Hell, even AOC recognizes this. AOC was on with CNN's Jake Tapper this weekend, and she was asked by Tapper, hey, is this all just a political hit job? And listen to her. She almost sounds like she's pro-Trump as she answers the question.
That's 5 cases. And to a voter, what do you say to a voter who says, well, that doesn't look like he's being treated equally before the law? That looks like somebody that the government is going after.
Has there ever been a president, Republican or Democrat, that has been subject to this level of criminal charges, indictments, and investigations? This is not about party.
I mean, right? So, of course, she tries to stick the landing at the end and say, he deserves this. But she does point something out here. Has there ever been a president who's been subjected to this much lawfare as Donald Trump? Ever. I mean, the first part of that statement, she could practically go on TV as a defender of Donald Trump. No president has ever been subjected to this. So what's the other part of this logically, right? What's the inverse of that? Oh, so we've never had a corrupt president ever. We've never had anybody worthy of scrutiny ever. The justice system has just never decided to go after any other president ever. Come on. And here they are going after Trump because, boy, they really want to stop him. The last thing they want is voters to be able to pick him.
Has been subject to this level of criminal charges, indictments, and investigations. This is not about party. This is not about politics. This is about corruption and criminality.
This is about corruption and criminality. Meanwhile, more from Trump here. He says, yes, this is election interference.
This is a case that could have been brought 3.5 years ago. And now they're fighting over days because they want to try and do it during the election. This is election interference.
By the way, I just want to be really clear about what he's talking about here. Also today in court, he was fighting it out over the start date for the Alvin Bragg trial. This is where Alvin Bragg is alleging that Donald Trump engaged in an illegal hush money payment scheme to Stormy Daniels designed to subvert the 2016 election. It's also widely considered the single weakest case the left has brought forward out of all of these weak cases. This one's considered the Julie Swetnick of all of them. It's the biggest turd of the group. And Trump is saying this is election interference, what Alvin Bragg is doing. But he lumps in not only the Alvin Bragg case, but the Judge Engeron decision here as well.
That's all it is, election interference. And it's a disgrace. We'll obviously be appealing. But this is a pure case of voter intimidation and election interference. And it shouldn't be allowed to happen. This case could have been brought by the DA, but they didn't want to bring it because they said they have no case. And then they bring it anyway. As you know, D.A. Bragg did not want to bring this case. He was forced into it for outside reasons, and it's a disgrace that it can happen. But this was a case that could have been brought 3.5 years ago, and they decide to wait now, just during the election, so that I won't be able to campaign.
Yeah.
We'll be appealing this.
It was the 2016 election is what they're arguing about. This happened during the 2016 election. And Trump's starting the timeline at, well, ever since I left office, they could have done this. And they didn't do it. Alvin Bragg didn't bring those charges. All of these charges were just brought in the last year. That's it. Again, the timing is highly suggestive.
The other decision, it will be my honor to post, and we'll post whatever is necessary, whether it be cash or securities or bonds. There's a decision we appreciate and respect the appellate division very much. And we will, I think, do very well in that whole thing. We have a judge who I believe is a crooked judge and a crooked attorney general. Absolutely.
All right, so let me dive into one other portion here that's not receiving a ton of attention today on what else the appeals panel said today. The Washington Post reports the following. In addition to reducing the amount that Trump must put up for his appeal bond, the panel also said it would stay other parts of Engeron's decision. Among other things, the panel said it would block Engeron's decree that Trump be prohibited from getting loans from any New York financial institution for 3 years, and his order that Trump's sons, Donald Trump Jr. and Eric Trump, be barred from serving in a top position at a New York corporation for 2 years. The panel said it declined to block some of Engeron's other moves, including his directive installing an independent director of compliance. All right, so there's some fascinating details here. Among them, Trump can still get loans in New York now, despite Engeron's prior ruling. You can't get loans. He still can now. And Donald Trump Jr. and Eric Trump can manage the company. They can actually take care of the family business. Again, these were penalties in a situation where there were no victims whatsoever. None of the banks felt defrauded. None of the banks testified against Donald Trump. All of them feel fulfilled and made whole. They all got their money back. Trump took a loan and then he paid it back. No victims. No victims. Contrary to the left-wing depictions of him as a guy who's always constantly stiffing everybody and stealing money and he never does everything right. Literally, the banks are happy with doing business with him and they want to do business with him again. And now this appeals panel today is saying, well, in fact, they can. They can do business with him again. Trump lays it out. He says this is election interference, and it's Biden-run.
This is all about election interference. This is all Biden-run things, meaning Biden and his thugs, because I don't know if he knows he's alive. And it's a shame. It's a shame what's happening to our country. This is election interference. They are doing things that have never been done in this country before. We've never had anything like it.
Yeah, and he goes on to say the reason for this is because look around. Look around. What's happening with our economy? Look what's happening with energy. Look what's happening with our borders.
They can't win an election because of the borders, because of energy prices, because of inflation, because of Afghanistan, the worst and most embarrassing day in the history of our country. He can't win because of Russia, because of all the problems, because of Ukraine being attacked by Russia. And he can't win because of the October 7th attack of Israel, which he should have never allowed to happen, would have never happened if I were president. Ukraine would have never been attacked if I was president. And you wouldn't have inflation if I was president. We didn't have inflation. So all of these things, so what they do is they do election interference, which is court cases, and let's try and tie him up, and let's take as much of his money as possible.
Yeah, I mean, this is what Nancy Pelosi called the wrap-up smear. You just make an allegation, let the media run wild with it. It doesn't have to be true. And that's how you destroy someone politically. Trump also took some questions, and he gave some, I thought, kind of hilarious answers. Donald Trump did take some questions today. And, to one of the reporters, he said, it's none of your business, which is always a fun answer.
You were going to say something?
Mr. President, you mentioned the cash you had. You said on Friday it's something like $500 million. You intended to put some of that into the campaign. Now that the bond's been reduced, are you going to start putting money into your campaign? You haven't done that since 2016.
Well, first of all, it's none of your business, I mean, frankly. But I might do that. I have the option. But if I have to spend $500 million on a bond, I wouldn't have that option.
Wouldn't have that option, he said. He was also asked, hey, what's your collateral going to be if you take a loan out here for this bond? This is his answer. Listen to the woman go, ooh.
What's your collateral for the bond? Cash. If you're elected,
It was a little subtle there at the end. What's your collateral for the bond? He turns back, looks over his shoulder, and he says, cash. And you're a woman go, ooh.
cash. If you're
Ooh. So you just have like 175 billion, just million rather, sitting around. The Washington Post also added today, and just in case you're wondering how bad things are going for the left, even the Washington Post's experts are saying this is a really bad sign for the left. They said Adam Pollack is an attorney who formerly served as assistant attorney general in New York. And the Post consulted him, and he said this decision could indicate that the court might consider permanently reducing the judgment against Trump on appeal. Quote, it's extraordinary because the law is clear that you have to post a bond in the full amount. And it additionally suggests there may be concern that the underlying judgment is itself excessive. Yeah, could be maybe an Eighth Amendment violation. You know, it's like a very excessive fine in a case that doesn't have any victims. Amazing. Kevin's in Pennsylvania, line 1. Kevin, good afternoon. You're on the Vince Coglianese Show.
Good afternoon, Vince. Once again, great job, and thank you for speaking the truth.
Thank you.
I had a quick question maybe you can answer.
Sure.
Where does all this money go? I mean, does it go like to Fonnie Willis and her lover? Do they get a cut of it, or I'm not...
I mean, that'd be a pretty neat trick, wouldn't it? They redirect it all the way to Georgia. No, it is a New York thing. So it goes right to the state of New York. They allege that he defrauded banks, but none of the banks are going to get any money. That's not what this is about. This is about just stealing from Trump. So they either steal his money or they steal his properties. That's Letitia James's desire, helped along by Judge Engeron. But no, the money, if he ultimately has to pay it, goes to the state of New York, Kevin.
Okay. I was kind of wondering that. I know one of these big lotteries is over $1 billion now. So if I win it, I'll help President Trump out.
You're the man. Thanks, Kevin. I appreciate it, brother. Yeah, that's the game. They're just trying to steal from him. There's no victims. We'll just take his cash. I'm not giving you the cash. All right, fine. We'll steal your buildings. How about don't steal from me? How about that? How about we start there? Coming up, Ken Cuccinelli joins us. He'll react to the president of Mexico blackmailing the United States, saying, it's a nice border you used to have. Would you like it back? Well, you're going to have to pay up. Hey, good afternoon to you. It is 3:35 here, News Talk 105.9 WMAL, where we're making sense of the news. Eddie Scarry is going to be with us from The Federalist coming up at 4 o'clock as MSNBC is in the midst of a full-blown hair light on fire session over the hire of a single squishy Republican. Joe Simonson is going to join us from the Washington Free Beacon at 4:30. We talk to him about the lies our president tells. And Will Scharf joins us at 5 o'clock, an attorney for President Trump. We get the latest from Trump world on all of these big legal developments today. You can join us at 888-630-9625, 888-630-WMAL. CBS had a jam-packed 60 minutes last night. On the show, they interviewed the president of Mexico, AMLO, and here's how some of that went.
With the ear of the White House, President Lopez Obrador proposed his fix, that the United States commit $20 billion a year to poor countries in Latin America and the Caribbean, lift sanctions on Venezuela, end the Cuban embargo, and legalize millions of law-abiding Mexicans living in the U.S.
If they don't do the things that you've said need to be done, then what?
The flow of migrants will continue.
Your critics have said what you're doing or what you're asking for to help secure the border is diplomatic blackmail. What do you say?
I'm speaking frankly. We have to say things as they are. And I always say what I feel. I always say what I think.
If they don't do those things, will you continue to help to secure the border?
Yes, because our relationship is very important. It is fundamental.
Very important. My next guest is very important. He's Ken Cuccinelli. He's a senior fellow for Homeland Security and Immigration at the Center for Renewing America and a former deputy secretary of Homeland Security under President Trump. Ken, great to have you back with us, sir. Thank you very much.
Always a pleasure.
All right, so he didn't really hold back there. He was pretty clear that this is blackmail. He said the only way I'm helping to secure America's southern border is if you cough up tens of billions of dollars in more foreign aid and you legalize every single Mexican illegal in the country, comma, by extension, giving me access to all of the money they send back to Mexico.
Yeah, it's important for people to realize that Mexico long ago stopped being an ally of the United States, if they ever were an ally. They're our neighbor. We live next door. We want as good relations as we can have, but they have no serious commitment to our well-being as you would expect out of an ally. You know, think of Britain or Israel. We make efforts at those relationships to keep them in good shape, to make sure they're doing well, like we're doing well. Think of Reagan and Thatcher when the Argentine War popped up. I don't think much of the Falkland Islands, but Reagan thought an awful lot of the British-U.S. relationship to actually step up and act, because actions speak louder than words, to do something. And because actions speak louder than words is why what Obrador said is so important. It is blackmail. They have the ability, should they choose to do so, to help more to stop the flow of illegals. They're not migrants, they're illegal invaders, whether they be Mexican or from other countries. And they simply refuse to do it. They've done it in the past. And my only asterisk to that would be that in the same way people should realize Mexico is not an ally. Neighbor, yes. Ally, no. That they also do not and never have in the history of their country controlled all of their own territory. Other nations that we call drug cartels control parts of Mexico and they operate from it, which, yes, by the way, is a violation of international law on the part of Mexico.
Yeah. Well, I will say that, you know, if this fact is true, as expressed in the 60 Minutes report, I was kind of stunned to hear that something like 300 political candidates were killed in Mexico last year. These are people running for office, were killed in Mexico last year. And AMLO was claiming that, well, I can travel the whole country very safely. He's like, I can go anywhere in the entire country. And I'm sitting there going, doesn't that kind of suggest that you're controlled by the cartels if they're letting you pass so safely?
Yeah, the cartels have allies in the Mexican government at every level, local, state, and federal. But they also create people who do the same things as allies by threatening them. And so it's a very difficult thing to untangle. In my view, the only criminal prosecution we should aim at all of this is to prosecute Mexican government officials who facilitate the cartels serving up death in America. We shouldn't bother with drug kingpin statutes and all the rest. Treat them as acts of war and respond accordingly. Bypass the criminal justice system and treat them as organized crime families that run terrorist organizations. That's what they are, and they've made so much money, especially, by the way, off human trafficking, which Joe Biden has made so cheap and cost-effective for the cartels, that they now they all sport military-level hardware, and their rates of killing their fellow Mexicans is off the charts by even American standards, and American liberals think America is violent. We got nothing on Mexico.
By the way, it's amazing the extent to which we don't see images of that. You know what I mean? Like here in the United States,
they are intentionally suppressed.
The American media does just not show us anything about what's actually happening both south of our border and inside the United States as a result of the cartels.
Yeah, and it's grisly. It's truly grisly, and some of the activities, including some of the gangs that work with the cartels, MS-13 is best known in our area for good reason. The nature of their violence is so vicious and brutal that most folks can't contemplate it. They can't fathom it. And the truth of the matter is, in my view, if they don't see pictures of it, they have a hard time really believing that it happened the way things actually do unfold.
I agree.
With these folks.
I agree.
They're genuinely evil, most evil people in the Western Hemisphere.
And I'm to this day, I say it whenever this issue comes up. I think that members of Congress should be forced to sit down in a theater and watch the vicious images of what's actually happening in our hemisphere, so that they have some sense of where they should focus their priorities.
Yes, well, wouldn't that be nice? If we could get Congress to focus on appropriate priorities.
Yeah.
But, we could go for days on that subject.
I know.
But even here, you hear from Republicans who are tougher on the border and this, that, and then they go down to the border and, gosh, I didn't know this, I didn't know that, I didn't know this other thing. And I'm glad they're going and learning it. It just strikes me as, for what is America's top priority, as polling shows and has for years, that it takes them so long. And the idea that fighting over a budget, by the way, is going to secure the border is really quite fanciful until the executive branch is willing to use its authority to actually do the job. Money is not relevant. I wouldn't give more money to Joe Biden with the notion he's going to close the border until he closes the border, because he can do that today.
Yeah. I mean, well, DHS isn't entitled to another dime. I mean, they keep selling us out, so they should have stopped that whole thing. But on this, on 60 Minutes, I want to return to this AMLO interview. AMLO seems to almost make a mockery of the Americans who are dying to fentanyl here in the United States as a result of what the Mexican government is allowing, which is the cartels to generate all of this fentanyl and then send that poison right into the United States to kill Americans. Here's that exchange. Take a listen.
The head of the DEA says cartels are mass producing fentanyl, and the U.S. State Department has said that most of it is coming out of Mexico. Are they wrong?
Sí. Yes. No. Or rather, they don't have all the information, because fentanyl is also produced in the United States.
The State Department says most of it's coming from Mexico.
Fentanyl is produced in the United States, in Canada, and in Mexico, and the chemical precursors come from Asia. You know why we don't have the drug consumption that you have in the United States? Because we have customs, traditions, and we don't have the problem of the disintegration of the family.
Yeah, there you go. Mexico is basically the Garden of Eden. It's just perfect. It's it's a utopia, and we are a terrible country, is what he's saying. And he says, this idea that this is all coming by way of Mexico, he kicks sand in the face of that. What do you make of all of this?
So, first of all, before I went to the dark side and went to law school, I was an engineer. I'm a numbers person. He doesn't give numbers or proportions. His comment is technically correct. Yes, fentanyl is made in the United States. Yes, it's made in Canada. But over 90% of the fentanyl in the United States is coming across the southwest border. And there's a reason for that. When you and I would talk 10 years ago to 15 years ago, then it's about the then drug problem. We talked about meth and fentanyl being made, meth in particular at that time, being made in people's houses. You'll remember that. And it turns them into these little tiny Superfund sites. Well, the reason you hear about that anymore is because the Mexican drug cartels produce it at such quantities, with such massive economies of scale, that it doesn't make sense for anybody in the United States to make it here anymore, because it's so darn cheap and available. And part of the reason it's so darn cheap and available is the open border. If you talk to street cops, ask them the street price of fill in the blank, fentanyl 5 years ago, and ask them the street price of fentanyl today, and you get the purest form of supply and demand explanation of what an open border means with respect to drugs and drug sales. And look, if Americans didn't use drugs, no one would be able to sell them to them, illicit drugs. So there's a moral point there that we can't shake our responsibility for. But the way AMLO lays that out is so offensive, as if they have no role in this whole process. And it's interesting to me that he said that the precursors are coming from Asia. The precursors are coming from Asia, You know where in Asia? China. That's where in Asia they're coming from. But he didn't say China.
Interesting.
Which sounds to me like he doesn't want his buddies over there to look too bad. Asia's generic, right? There's nobody to blame for that. China's quite specific. And this is in China's strategic interest that we have this problem. So as much as they occasionally put on a show about enforcing laws against these precursors, they really don't, in my view. They come easily into Mexico. It takes so little of this stuff that it's awfully easy to hide.
Right.
And until we're willing to go after facilities and people involved in Mexico, this problem will continue with fentanyl specifically, and it'll be worse because of lower prices and availability.
Yes.
Again, we're just talking about the drugs here with an open border. We need to close the border. It could be done tomorrow with presidential authority alone.
Absolutely. And on the issue of the fentanyl crisis here in the United States, it's changed over time. I mean, it began with the corruption of the pharmaceutical companies pressing opioids on Americans and saying there were no risks to that, and that getting buy-in from a corrupt FDA that helped them in that effort. And it has changed since then to a lot of this is like recreational drug use by kids who don't even realize that they're consuming fentanyl and they're being killed by it.
Right.
So it's kind of it is complex in the United States, and you're right, we've got our own problems here, but boy, Mexico's making them so much worse.
They do. Again, a neighbor, not an ally.
No,
Mexico.
Not at all. So if one more thing with you, Ken Cuccinelli, if I can go back to where we began, which is AMLO claimed that unless $20 billion heads south from the United States, and unless we start taking care of Cuba and Venezuela and treating them as great friends, and unless we legalize every Mexican illegal in America, then he's not going to help us at all with our southern border. In your experience with the Trump administration, it didn't take gifts to Mexico to make that happen. Couldn't we apply a little pressure, a little force?
Yes, it took actually closing the border or the credible threat of doing so to get the Mexicans to behave differently and cooperatively. And at that point, we got more cooperation than we'd ever gotten before. And, you know, think about it, in Mexico and the U.S. are in each other's top three trading partners. For Mexico, we are their number one trading partner. Mexico ranges from 1 to 3 for us with China and Canada. They need us more than we need them. Now, it's a big deal on both sides of that border, and it's a big deal at the border. Border communities, they live across the border, and I met legitimately friends and family and all sorts of things, and work. But when you boil it down, the money that Mexico gets via U.S. trade is a much, much bigger proportion of its economy than the money America gets from its Mexican trade.
Yes.
Much, much bigger. And so, you know, you always want, in any negotiation, you want to find asymmetric leverage, things that you can put on or take off the table that have a much bigger impact on the other side of the table than your side. And trade is one of them. And it worked for President Trump. Greg Abbott used it briefly a couple of years back, and it's available again. And the fact of the matter is, it would be nice to have open and free trade across that border, fair trade across that border. But why would we fund our own demise? And that's what we're doing right now with a good chunk of what's coming over the border from Mexico.
All right, Ken Cuccinelli, sir, as always, thank you for your time. Really appreciate your wisdom on this subject and so many others. Thank you, Ken. All right, let's go to the phones where we find Mike in Gainesville, line 4. Mike, good afternoon. You're on the Vince Colonnade Show.
Hey, Vince, thanks for taking my call.
Yes, sir.
Happy Monday.
Same to you.
Yeah, Jim Jordan is usually pretty quick with a blurb. I don't understand how he was flabbergasted by Leslie Stahl on 60 Minutes so convincingly when she was basically saying not everybody believes that the 2020 election was stolen, and he really was having a hard time dealing with her, claiming that nobody thinks the 2020 election was stolen, and he didn't come back with. We're still questioning the 2016 election, Leslie.
Yes.
The Democrats are doing that.
That's right. No, what Mike is referring to is there's a big segment on 60 Minutes last night about misinformation, disinformation, and Jim Jordan's been digging into all of the people behind trying to censor the American public. So he sits down for an interview on 60 Minutes, and you're right, he did seem staggered when she was like, well, no one really thinks the election was stolen. And he just didn't know how to answer. He was just sitting there kind of with a blank look on his face for some time. And obviously, 60 Minutes made an editing decision to leave his blankness on screen for as long as excruciatingly possible. So you're right about that. Yeah, he's usually better with a quip. And we'll get into that, Mike. Thank you for that. We'll talk about that very thing coming up later in the program, mis and disinformation, and what 60 Minutes didn't tell its audience last night, which, of course, was a kind of disinformation itself.